Hi there, this is Valentine, and in this tutorial I wanted to introduce you to web development and testing tools for working with APIs. It is called Postman and you can get it for free at getpostman.com. It is available for Windows, macOS and Linux, and it's super easy to use. Just in case you have on Google Chrome an extension called Postman, make sure you uninstall that and download the standalone app, because otherwise what I'll be showing in this tutorial will not work. And just remember that the Chrome plugin is deprecated and doesn't contain the latest features that Postman has to offer. In this simple tutorial, I will show you how to get started with Postman by actually working with a real-world API. I will explain you the HTTP methods, get, post, how we can build requests within Postman, write simple tests, and overall get a feeling of what Postman and APIs are about. But since I mentioned APIs, what exactly is an API? The first step in working with an API is to see the documentation, because in the documentation is specified how exactly to interact with the API, which data is available, and how exactly you need to format your HTTP messages in order to get that data. In my case, this is a Swagger documentation, and this has been automatically generated from the code that I have written the API in. You will see here two categories. So for example, for orders, there are multiple endpoints. And an endpoint is simply a part of the address which points to a specific resource. For example, I want to see the orders that are available, and you'll see here that this will return a list of pizza orders. Or for example, with this endpoint, selecting another HTTP method, I'll be able to create an order or to delete an order once I don't need it anymore, or maybe the customer has changed his mind. Let's start small and deal with the first endpoint. If I click over it, I'll be able to see here a button, try it out. A request will be sent from the browser, and this is the response body. Not all APIs have a built-in documentation that allow you to play around with the API right from your browser. And this is exactly the part where Postman is useful. And additionally, what you can do here is quite limited. Let's try and get this to work in Postman. I'm gonna copy this address here and open Postman. The first time you open Postman, you will be asked to create an account, and I highly recommend that you do that right from the beginning, because this will ensure that your data gets synchronized with the Postman servers and that you do not lose anything. But just in case you're not comfortable yet with creating an account, towards the bottom of the screen you will see something like "Take me straight to the app," and then you will still be able to work with Postman without creating an account. That's totally fine. Right from the beginning you will see that Postman somehow is similar to a browser, because I have this tab functionality. I can open multiple tabs, I can close them. What I will do next is I will simply paste the address from the documentation. When you're working with Postman and you're pasting stuff around, you always need to make sure that you do not include any spaces. It's particularly important when adding any kind of data, whether it's a value, a key, or anything else. For example, in this case, I have a new line here, so this is something that I don't want. So this is the API that I've built so far. It contains this endpoint called orders. This is the address of the API, or the base URL, how we sometimes call it. And when I'm calling this endpoint, I'm using the get HTTP method, which is usually used for fetching data. And you will see here in the response the current orders. So for example, an app that will be displayed in the kitchen will be able to fetch this data and display what is the next order and what pizza size it is and so on, how it should be made. So what actually happened in the background? Well, Postman has sent this HTTP request. It said, "Give me all the orders." And this request went to the server that I have built, where the API actually lives. So API is a program that runs on the server, and in some regards it's pretty similar to a program or a server that returns you normal websites when you are on the internet. The server then went to the database and said, "Hey database, give me a list of all the orders that are available," because Typically, a server will not be able to store any data without having a database. So database is for the storage. And database will give this information back to the server. The server itself will then create an HTTP response message, and that message will come back to Postman. And this is why you'll be able to see this nice response formatted in JSON. Then this information can be consumed. Now we're using Postman just to interact with the API to understand how the API works. If we want to build applications on top of it, we'll have to learn a programming language and to maybe create an Android app or an iOS app, or to build a website or anything else that consumes this data. But Postman is perfect from just playing around and understanding what kind of data is available, how do the requests work, and so on. The request builder in Postman, which is represented on this top part, allows you to build and configure all aspects of the HTTP request. For example, you can select the HTTP method, and we'll go over them later as well. This will be the address. You can specify query parameters, but just as well you can add headers or specify a body for your request in case you're sending some data. Since this first request is working fine, let's try and save it. In Postman, in order to save a request, you first need to create a collection. A collection contains multiple related requests. So for example, in this case, for this API, for Pizzeria Valentino's API, I'll create a new collection. I'll probably call it Pizzeria API. Now that I have done that, I can simply click on the Save button. I can name my request, for example, orders or fetch orders. And from the collection list, there's only one currently. I will select the Pizzeria API and I will be able to save it. Now later, if I close this tab, I will still find the collection here. I can go inside it. I can click the request that I want to execute. And then I will get the same response back. Going back to the documentation, let's assume that we now want to create an order. Say the customer wants to order something, or I want to build the app that will take orders from the customer. So I first need to get familiar with how can I submit an order. You will see here that the HTTP method or HTTP verb is post. Typically, get is used for fetching data, and post is used for adding data. Post usually indicates that something will be changed on the server and especially in the database. A new entry will be added. For example, if I used to use this endpoint post orders 2 times, I'll create 2 more orders in the database and 2 more pizzas will be baked. On the other side, if I simply use get, I can use it as often as I need. There will be no change in the database because the database will only give me back information. So this is like the major difference between get and post. Get will simply fetch information without changing the database, and post will change the state of the database by adding information there. In a similar fashion, delete will then delete something from the database, again changing the database. Let's go and inspect how exactly we can create a new order. You will see here that the endpoint is the same. So it is still /orders, but the HTTP verb is different. Additionally, in order to specify what we want to create, we need to also add a request body to our request, of course. So if you look here on how to specify this, if I click this field, the value will be populated with some details. So let's copy this and go then in Postman and try to get this to work. So I'll open up a new tab. I'll go to the body part of the request, select raw, and from the drop-down list, I'll select JSON. There are multiple ways on how you can send data with a post request, because this is something we need to select as well. And you can submit form data, or to have the form data URL encoded, or to simply send it as raw. There are multiple ways to do it, but in this case, we're just going to deal with a JSON request. I'm going to paste here the information. And as you see, because I've selected JSON, the information is also nicely formatted and has this color and indicates that everything is okay. If I was to make a mistake, for example, by removing this comma or by making a semantical mistake in the JSON, this will be invalid and the server will not be able to understand this. Postman will show you here that something is wrong with what you have done and you probably need to correct it before sending it. So let's start adding a few information. For example, we want the crust to be normal. The flavor should be cheese. The size will be medium. And the table number is 1. Additionally, we need to specify where this address should go. So from the previous request, I'm going to copy the address and paste it here. You'll see that it's the same endpoint, it's API/orders, just a different HTTP method. Now, if you go ahead and submit this, you will see on the lower part of the screen that we get the so-called HTTP response. And the HTTP response has multiple parts. Now you will see here in the body part of the response that we get a message. It's complaining that we haven't sent an authorization header, and we'll go back to that later. Additionally, what the response contains is a status, and this is very important because this will be in this case a status 401. 401 means unauthorized. So what that means is that the endpoint that we are trying to send data to expects us to be logged in order to make changes to the database, for example, which is understandable. We don't want anybody having access to our API to add data there. So for that reason, you will get here an unauthorized. As you remember from the previous response, here is a status 200 OK, and we didn't need to provide any authorization. So there's definitely another difference between GET and POST when it comes to this specific API. This is just a matter of implementation. There are no hard rules on how things should be. For example, adding here data with a POST could have worked without an authorization. So there's no rule that if it is a POST, it must be authorized. It can be just as well authorized even for getting data. So going back to the documentation, you probably remember that on top of orders, there was also auth. And there's a separate endpoint here which deals with authentication. And the way this goes is that we provide a username and password, and this endpoint will create an access token. An access token is simply like a temporary password. So we're exchanging our username and password, and the access token will be something that will be valid only for a short period of time. This is quite common for APIs not to use username and passwords for authentication, but to either generate access tokens or API tokens or other tokens that can be later revoked without changing the username and password that was used actually in the background for that. It's a bit more complicated, but probably if I show you this example, you will understand it much easier. So in order to get this to work, we again need to have another endpoint here. This will be the auth endpoint, and we need to send this request body. So I'm going to copy this and go back in Postman. I'm going to open a new request, select post, go to the body, select raw again, JSON, and paste the example from here. The username will be test, and the password will be test as well. Additionally, we'll have to copy the base URL and add auth as the endpoint. Let's see how this goes. We'll see now in the response that the status is 200, and we have received here an access token. This access token is a JOT access token, and it contains some information about the user. Now, we can use this access token in our create order endpoint in order to authenticate ourselves. So instead of providing the username and password test, we'll provide this access token. So in this case, I'm going to simply copy everything and make sure that you do not include any quotes at the beginning or at the end. I'm going to go back to the post request, and here on top you'll find authorization, And there are quite a few authorization helpers here, which make your life a bit easier when dealing with different authentication methods. We're going to use this bearer token because we now have a token, and we're going to simply paste the token here. What Postman will do is we'll add an authorization header to our request when we send it, and then the server will be able to tell from the token if we are allowed to add a new order. So let's resend this and see if it works. You'll be able to see now the status code is 201, which means created. So the request has been created, has been accepted, and the order has been created on the server, actually in the database. Which means that if we call now the first endpoint when it comes to fetching orders, we'll see that our order has been added to the list. So let's go ahead and save this request to the collection as well. So in order to make everything consistent, we first need to authenticate ourselves. So I'm going to save this as auth. And then we're going to create the order. And that's about it. Finally, let's say that we want to delete a specific order. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the address again. We will have here the endpoint for orders. So if we want to delete an order, we have to use the orders endpoint. I'm going to select here the HTTP verb called delete. And this will tell the server we're trying to delete something. We still need to find a way to specify what are we trying to do. So in this case, we're going to specify that we want to delete, let's see which order. Let's say the first order is no longer needed. You will see here that each result in this list has an ID. This is order ID 1, this is order ID 2, 3, and so on. So let's say that we want to delete order ID 1. So what we're going to do is we're going to add here a /1. And this will identify this specific order on the server. And then the server will know he's trying to delete the order with ID 1. And then it says order deleted. So if we try to fetch the orders again, you will see that the order with ID 1 now disappeared from here and is no longer available. Now if we try again to delete the same order, we'll see that the server says, hey, there is no order 1, I cannot get it anymore. So let's save this request as well. So far we have played around with Postman and we have managed to create like a normal workflow. Maybe we first want to look at what orders are available and we can see them, and this is something that can be available in the kitchen on a display. But then if we want to create an order, we'll have to first get a token, we can create it, and then once we don't need that order anymore, we can delete it. So we have like a complete workflow. Now what Postman is good for is not only playing around with the API to understand how it works, but also to write tests that ensure that the API still works the same on the long run. So for example, if something would have changed in the API, maybe I'm trying to add a new feature, I may break existing features without even knowing about it. So it's important to write API tests in order to document how the API is performing. So for example, in the fetch orders, what I can do is to simply write a very basic test. And if I go here to the test tab, this will allow me to write JavaScript code inside this request. That code will be executed after the request is complete. So once the response came back from the server. If I open this snippet panel from here, I'll be able to find some snippets and they allow me to quickly generate some tests. Now I'm not going to go very much into testing because this is a different topic and much more advanced. But let's write a very simple test. Let's say that we expect that the status is 200. So what this will do is that every time this request will be sent, and I'm sending it right now, this specific test will be executed. You'll see here in the test results that the status is 200. If I copy the same test and go to create order, you'll see here that we get an error first of all. So obviously there's already an order for table 1 and this is causing another status code. It's a conflict. Additionally, we didn't get a 200. Actually, we expect here to be a 201. So what happens is that when Postman detects that the status code is not what was expected, here in the test results, it will show up as failed. Because we wanted to test the status code is 200, but actually the assertion error, actually the test that was executed, expected 200 but got 409. So that's a bit different. So if we try to change the table, for example, the status will be 201 and the order will be created. And even if it is not a complex test, it still gives an indication if this API is working properly. Finally, I wanted to quickly talk about variables. Now, as you have seen, we have here the address of the server where we have this API installed. And for different reasons, they might be different environments where you can use it. So what you can do is to define environments and to reuse information by reusing variables. So this goes like this. If I go here to manage environments on this key, I'll be able to create an environment. And let's say this is called production. And I'll be able to add here an URL. So I will call it base URL. This will be the base URL for my API. I'm going to paste here at the initial value. And if I click away, the current value will be populated as well. Quick explanation here. Typically, you're not working in Postman alone. You may want later to share your environments or your collections with others. What is here in the initial value is what will be shared. So this is practically public in the sense that when you're sharing your collection with somebody, others will be able to see this value. The current value is something that is only specific to your computer and will not be seen by others. So for example, if at the initial value I just write fix me and I would share this environment with others, others will only see here fix me but not be able to tell which is the address that I've used. So I've added that endpoint. And now I can select the environment production. I want to start replacing this entire thing here because this will not allow me to use multiple environments if I later want to. So with double curly braces, I will be able to write here base URL. And if I hover over it, you will see the value that will be used. So the current value is this one. I will quickly do the same for all endpoints. Variables can be used for storing tokens as well, or any other information that you normally do not want to store inside a collection. So for example, this value here would be better if I'm not directly using it inside the create order request in the authorization, but for me to use a variable. So I'm going to call the variable token. And for the initial value, I will say simply fix me because I do not want to share this sensitive information with somebody else. And I will just put it inside the current value. Again, with double curly braces, I'll be able to select the token. If I hover over it, you will see its current value. And if I quickly change the table number so that it doesn't fail, you will see that the authorization still works. And I don't have to get the token from anywhere else. So this is a quick introduction to Postman where we try to get an API to work and to be able to get orders with using the getHTTP method. Then with Post, we have created new orders and then deleted them with the delete method, submitting JSON request bodies, and generally trying to have like a feeling of how Postman can help us with this API. Additionally, we can use variables, and these variables can be actually written from scripts as well. The scripts always are inside the test or in the pre-request tabs. You can write here scripts in JavaScript. You can also use Postman in order to write API tests which document that everything still works the same. And I gave you here a simple example with the status code. You can go and create more advanced scenarios. Now, actually, Postman is much more than it initially seems. There are multiple ways on how you can use Postman. So far, we have only used Postman to do manual API testing. And this means we are inside the Postman app and we play around with values and try to see how the API works and if there are any issues or stuff like that. On the other side, there's also the possibility of doing automatic API testing. And automatic API testing means that you are able to take this Postman collection that you have and automatically go through all the requests, execute a test, and make sure that everything still works the same. For example, a simple scenario would be I'm creating that order, I'm getting it using the get endpoint, and after that I'm deleting it and testing again if it was properly deleted or stuff like that. So this ensures that the entire workflow that I want to implement in my pizzeria works without any issues and that I can add new features to the API without breaking existing ones. And for that, it's absolutely mandatory that you have API tests written in JavaScript. But additionally, with scripts, you can really build very complex workflows. For example, going back and forward between the request, building more advanced stuff. In order to automatically run the API test, there are multiple ways. Two of them are sort of like built in Postman. One of them is the collection runner, and the other one is the monitors. But the monitors has a very limited functionality. But if you want to do automatic API testing in your own infrastructure, you can use Human, which is the CLI companion for Postman. It means that you can use any continuous integration server, for example, Jenkins or GitLab or Travis or any other, to use this CLI tool to automatically use the collection that you have in Postman to execute the tests and to generate reports or alerts or anything that you need. Postman can also help you with the API documentation to generate something relatively similar to what you have seen here on Swagger, but at the same time to help with a collaboration by having a shared collection or a shared workspace that is available within your team, can help you work with mock servers, or if you have external data files which contain multiple data sets, you can use them as well in Postman, and especially in part of the automation. You can maybe have a data set with different pizzas that you want to order and to rerun that data set over and over again. So there are definitely a lot of possibilities that Postman can help you with. Time is short, and hopefully I've managed in this tutorial to give you like a general overview of what's possible in Postman. If you want to look for more tutorials, I will definitely recommend that you subscribe to this channel, give this video a thumbs up, and check the video description because it is really literally filled with a lot of tips and tricks on what you can do with Postman and how you can learn all these things. Guys, thank you so much. See you next time, and until then, good luck learning Postman, and actually I'm super excited about this. Hopefully you are excited as well. See you next time.